Hi, the idea here is that I would like to show progress on the design of this bat box. I've made some changes to the recommended design in order to automate it using a CNC router table. So I wanted to review some of this for a couple purposes. One is Ian in particular, and others can perhaps give some feedback on the suitability uh, for bats of these changes. And then both Ian and others can perhaps suggest improvements based on those who have better woodworking knowledge of the bats, and simply see things that I am missing. I've often found that a group or a design team comes up with a lot of ideas that a single designer misses. And so I thought this would be a good juncture to do that. So this is the bat box as it looks now, and what we're going to do is have a look inside a little bit. This design uses half-inch plywood. It's designed in a parametric fashion, which means it's easy to make changes to parameters and dimensions, shapes, thicknesses, etc., all very, very quickly, and the entire design will update, and with that, any drawings that I've made or any computer programs to run the CNC router. So first, I'm going to hide the roof. There's two pieces of the roof, so we can kind of see inside. And then let's also hide one piece of the outer shell we can see inside. And I'll have a few questions here. So one thing I want to point out is the grooves are cut in with a 1/8 router bit, and I've given, instead of them cutting all the way to the end like you would do with a table saw, I stop before the end so I don't get breakout, and also to leave room for the overlap. So the groove isn't in the overlap. I think that'll make a better joint and a stronger result. I'm a little concerned with strength as we go to half-inch, so I want to make sure that we do what we can there. So these grooves currently are 1/8 inch grooves. They are on a center, let's see what's the spacing. The groove spacing right now is 0.4 inches. So the recommended was, I believe, 1/4 to 1/2. So this is sort of partway in between there. I want to leave enough material there for strength in the board. But if there's a thought that those gaps, those grooves should be spaced more tight or less tight, please let me know. The overlap is there. One of the things that is perhaps not so obvious, I will pre-drill holes for the fastening screws. Sorry about the color there. So right here, these are pre-drilled holes. Let me get rid of more of the outer shell here so that we can see what that looks like. So these holes are pre-drilled so that we can then more easily drive screws in there. And the spacing of these holes is a question I had. Right now, I have these spaced at my screw spacing is 3 inches. I'm not sure if that's adequate or overkill. Feedback on that would be appreciated. The holes between the in the inner layer, so these are access holes. I went with the standard. I apologize for the flashing color here. The tool is trying to make selections. Went for the design. One of the advantages with the router is that those don't have to be round. If oval or elliptical or some other shape or size would work better, that's an easy thing to change. And the same thing applies to the slots that are on the very outside of the two, at the front and the back. Those also, and again, I apologize for the funky color stuff. If we go to the outer shells, we see these grooves that are in this area right here. Again, those were pulled off the design. Those could be a different shape, size, location, anything like that. The holes you see here are kind of pre-drilled for locating the spacer blocks. I still have a little thought on, a little thinking to do on how the spacer blocks get located inside. But that's kind of that. So the idea, if we go back to the inside, I'm just going to hide some of the outer elements and walk through the build and design, and we can think about the assembly procedure and any other thing that we can do with the router to speed up or simplify production. So this is the pull sleeve here. So the initial size, it's at 3.5 by 3.5 inches. I'm not sure, I'm going to measure some 4x4s and see if perhaps we need something a little bigger for spacing tolerance in case there's some variability in the 4x4s. Any feedback on that would be appreciated. And down here at the bottom, there are holes for putting screws into that 4x4 from the sleeve. And one of the questions I had is, right now I only have grooves where they're sort of inside the box. And the question is, should the grooves go down further where there are grooves outside? Do the bats hang outside the box as well, or do they need grooves as a landing area that they can grab a hold of and then climb up there? I really don't know bat behavior well enough. So that's a question. Is this groove pattern adequate, or should it be improved upon? So the inner pieces would come with these pre-drilled holes, as I mentioned, from the machine. And in the assembly process, we would line them up and screw those together. That would be the inner sleeve. At that point, we would add spacers. There are 4 spacers, and the spacers are made manually and placed. And I haven't exactly decided how to locate them within the device or within the box here, because we want to make sure that when we're running screws through from the next layer, that the screws hit these mounting blocks and that they are not exposing the metal screws to the bats. It should, they should be, we want to make sure that when we apply the screws from this inner shell into the pole sleeve, that the screws, and again, if you look closely, you can see the 4 assembly holes there, and that's where screws will go into these mounting blocks as we then apply the inner layer. And again, those screws will mount to the mounting blocks, and as well we will screw between the edges of the shells with these mounting holes here. So any feedback on that, greatly appreciated. Is 3-inch spacing there excessive? Is it not? The inner shells are grooved on both sides. One of the things about the grooves, I've kept them clear of the overlap area here. Does that reduce the hanging space for bats too much? Do they particularly like the corners, or is this something that should ideally work? That's a question perhaps for Ian or Juliana or someone who knows more about bats than I do, which is anyone who knows anything about bats. Similarly, once this is together, we add spacers for the next layer of the rocket box. Next stage of the rocket? I don't know. Anyways, the outer shell goes on there. Front and back have these slots, these access slots. And again, I've pre-drilled the holes for the spacer blocks, and that presumes that the spacer blocks are in the correct location. And once all of the 4 shells are on, this is kind of what it looks like. And as I indicated, let's look from down below here. The grooves start inside the overlap area at the moment. And this landing area, should it be grooved or not? Appreciate some feedback. And then finally, when this is together, the inner roof and is put on to seal things off, and then an outer roof to provide a little bit of overhang. And the box ends up, because the material is thinner at 1/2 inch, I kept the spaces the same, the gaps where the bats are in, and the overall rocket box ends up being slightly smaller in X and Y here because of the thinner plywood. And so that affects the material here. Basically, from what I've been able to look at, I think that 1 sheet of plywood makes 1 bat box. So that makes it a little bit easier from a material planning point of view. We might find that there's some leftovers, depending how good we get at cutting up the plywood. Perhaps we can get the extra box or 2 out of a batch of plywood. At any rate, please feel free to ask questions, make comments. If you're interested in Fusion 360, I think this is probably James. I'm happy to share the model with you, and perhaps you and I can connect one-on-one. Probably virtually works the best, and I can walk you through some of the intricacies of the design in Fusion 360 just for your learning purposes if you're interested. Thanks for your time. I appreciate some feedback.